It all started on a Tuesday morning, just like any other. The kind where the birds were louder than the traffic. And the only real rush was getting to the gas station before the donuts went stale. Hank Remmer was already up. At 72, he didn't sleep in much. His back wouldn't allow it, even if he tried. The sun was barely stretching through the blinds as he poured a cup of strong black coffee, the kind that tasted like it had a history. His wife, Elaine, was already dressed, pink cardigan, hair pinned back the way she'd worn it since the 80s. She kissed his cheek on the way out, just like she had every morning for the last 45 years. "I'm heading to Marlowe's for gas and coffee. They got those jelly sticks again." She smiled. Hank smiled back. "Grab me. 1, 2, if they haven't all been snatched." Marlowe's Gas and Go sat 2 blocks from their quiet suburban home in Oak Ridge, a town where trouble never stayed long, and most folks still waved at strangers. Hank had been a part of this town longer than the pavement on Main Street, retired now, but years ago, he'd worked for a federal agency he wasn't allowed to name. Even Elaine didn't know all of it. She didn't ask. She just knew that when Hank said he'd be late, it meant he was saving someone else's tomorrow. But those days were long past, or so he thought. Elaine reached Marlowe's around 8:17 a.m. The security camera timestamp would later confirm that she moved slow but steady, paid cash at pump 3, like always, and walked inside to get that jelly stick for Hank. She was just handing over a $5 bill when everything changed. 3 unmarked SUVs barreled into the parking lot like a storm that forgot how to knock. Brakes screeched, black-clad men jumped out, and radios exploded with chatter. Customers ducked, clerks froze, and Elaine, she turned, startled, still holding the change in her hand. One officer shouted, "Drop the item." Elaine, confused, held out her hand, the same one with the paper bag and change. "What item?" she asked softly, almost too softly for anyone to hear. But the man didn't respond. He just moved faster. Another officer stepped closer, hand already on the taser at his side. On the ground, now Elaine didn't scream. She just blinked and tried to explain. I think you're mistaking me for the crack of the taser silenced everything." Her knees gave first, then the paper bag dropped, sending coins scattering across the concrete. Then her whole body followed, slumping in a slow-motion collapse that felt like it lasted years. Hank was still in his driveway when he heard the sirens, not the kind that warned you to get out of the way, the kind that told you it was already too late. He stood still for a moment, coffee in one hand, rag in the other. His eyes narrowed as the low roar of vehicles faded into the distance, pointing toward He didn't panic. He placed the mug on the porch rail, tossed the rag over his shoulder, and walked toward the station. By the time he reached the corner of Ridge and Harper, he saw it. The chaos, the yellow tape, the armored vests, and their... Near pump 3, a soft pink cardigan crumpled on the pavement. His legs moved faster now. An officer raised a hand. "That's my wife." Another officer stepped in, hand on holster. "Sir," I said, "she was getting gas." His voice didn't rise. It didn't tremble, it just carried steady and sure. The kind of voice that had once given orders over encrypted channels. "We have reason to believe she was an accomplice." The officer snapped. She failed to comply. Hank stopped just outside the tape. His eyes, sharp despite the years, scanned the scene. "You think that woman right there," he pointed calmly, "who carries peppermint in her purse and brings muffins to the church bake sale. You think she's a threat? Sir, please, you..." "Tased my wife," Hank said, quieter now, like he wasn't talking to the officer anymore, "and you don't even know why." Behind him, neighbors were beginning to gather. Some were filming, some just watched in stunned silence. The SWAT team repositioned, one of them younger, nervous, called in backup. Another barked orders into his radio. But the man in charge, the one with the polished boots and the clipboard under his vest. He stepped forward. "Secure the man," he ordered. "He may be the handler." "Handler?" Hank blinked. "You don't even know who you're talking to. Do you?" Before they could move in, he raised both hands slowly, not in surrender, but in warning. He took one deliberate breath, looked the team leader straight in the eye, and said 5 words. "Call Director Mathis." Right now, that stopped them. Not all of them. Some still had rifles raised. Some still barked meaningless phrases. But the man in charge, the one who'd clearly never been told no in his career, he froze. "Director Mathis?" he asked, like he wasn't sure he heard it right. Hank nodded once. And tell him Hank Remmer is standing in your perimeter." The radios went quiet. One officer looked toward the other. Another tapped something into a tablet with shaking hands. They weren't sure if it was a joke, a trap, or something worse. Then, one of the veterans, a man in his 50s with 2 tours under his belt and more sense than ego, stepped forward. "Sir," he whispered to the commander. "I know that name." Hank stood silent. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the tape. Elaine, still on the pavement, started to blink. Her fingers twitched. A low groan escaped her lips. She wasn't out cold, but she was dazed. "She has a heart condition," Hank added. "You need a medic here." Now, no one moved. The tension hung in the air like fog, thick, heavy, and too quiet to ignore. Every second ticked like a drumbeat, and then the radio finally crackled. "Dispatch confirms. Wrong location. Repeat wrong location. Suspect last seen at North Harper, not South Harper." The air changed. Just like that, guns lowered. A medic rushed in, and the commander, now pale, now sweating, stepped back with the realization that everything, absolutely everything, had just gone terribly wrong. Elaine was lifted gently by the medic. She was conscious, but weak, the kind of weak that didn't come just from a fall, but from the weight of shock pressing down on the chest. Her eyes met Hank's for a moment, and that was all it took. He stepped toward her, but 2 officers still flanked him, unsure if they were supposed to stop him or salute him. The older medic checked her pulse. "It's elevated, irregular. We need to get her checked for arrhythmia immediately." Hank didn't look away from his wife. "She's had 2 episodes in the last 5 years. Stress triggers them." The team leader, suddenly stripped of the authority he'd worn like armor, stepped forward. "Sir, we didn't know." "No," Hank interrupted. "You didn't check. There's a difference." His voice wasn't raised. Not once did he yell, but the way he said it, the way he stood it, quieted the entire lot. That's what happens when a man used to commanding classified missions in foreign lands suddenly finds himself explaining common sense in his hometown. One of the younger SWAT members approached cautiously. "Sir, are you that Hank Remmer, the one from the GhostNet protocol?" Hank gave a small nod. "Retired. 10 years now. Thought I'd spend the rest of my life fixing fence posts and oiling hinges." The young man stepped back like he'd just shaken hands with history. Across the station lot, the radios kept buzzing, but now in quieter tones, updates, confirmations, and more than a few apologies whispered too low to hear. The misfire had been massive. They were supposed to intercept a suspect dealing in high-grade narcotics. The address was 1104 North Harper, not South. But they hadn't double-checked, they just saw movement. An older woman with a purse and a paper bag. Assumed threat. Reacted Elaine was now seated upright on the back bumper of the ambulance, a thermal blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Her hands still trembled, but her voice had returned, faint but firm. "He asked me to drop my change. I thought he meant the coins." Hank stepped beside her, offering his hand. Always had. The SWAT commander took off his helmet, letting the weight settle into his hands. His face was drained. "Mr. Remmer, I'm not the one you need to apologize to," Hank said, motioning gently toward Elaine. "She just wanted to get coffee and gas." "I understand, sir," the commander said. "We're running an internal review. I can promise disciplinary action will follow." Hank shook his head slowly. "I'm not interested in careers ruined. I'm interested in people learning to stop before they pull a trigger." It was then that another vehicle pulled up, sleek, unmarked. No lights, but the kind of presence you don't question. A black government SUV came to a slow stop beside the gas station. The back door opened and out stepped a man in a dark suit, short-cropped gray hair, and a gait that told everyone he didn't wait for permission. "Director Mathis," someone whispered. Every uniformed officer. Straightened Mathis walked straight toward Hank, without even glancing at the SWAT team. "Hank," he said, extending his hand. "It's been a long time." Hank didn't shake it. He simply nodded. "Long enough that you forgot to update your field teams." The director turned toward the commander. "Walk me through it," he said sharply. The commander stammered. "We had intel that a shipment was moving through this block. An agent flagged a suspicious vehicle. When the suspect exited, she was non-compliant. She's 69, Mathis cut in. Non-compliant or confused? She didn't follow orders." "She was tased," Hank interrupted. For holding change, silence followed. Heavy, sticky silence, the kind that sinks into your skin. Mathis let it linger before speaking again. "I'm issuing a full review. Until then, all non-critical tactical ops are suspended in this county. Understood?" No one objected. Mathis turned back to Hank. "You shouldn't have had to say those words, Hank. I trained half of these people on doctrine you helped write." "I know," Hank said, "and I hoped they would remember to think first." He looked over at the young officer who had fired the taser. The kid couldn't have been older than 25. He stared at the ground now, hands clenched, jaw tight, regret in every inch of his posture. Elaine, voice still fragile, broke the silence. "What's your name, son?" The officer looked up, eyes wide. Brandon Keller." She nodded slowly. "You'll remember this day for the rest of your life." He nodded, silent. "Make sure it teaches you something," she said softly, and with that, she leaned into Hank's side, her eyes beginning to close as the medic finished checking her vitals again. The adrenaline was leaving her now, just exhaustion and ache remained. Hank helped her up carefully and walked her to the truck. He turned to Mathis before climbing in. "This town doesn't need special ops," Hank said plainly. "It needs people who listen. People who slow down before they act." Mathis nodded, understood. He opened the passenger door for Elaine, then moved around to the driver's side. Before stepping in, he looked once more at the SWAT team, now quiet, still, each man and woman unsure whether they were part of the solution or the problem. Then, just before turning the ignition, Hank said loud enough for them to hear, "If your orders ever tell you to hurt people before asking questions, your orders are broken." And then he drove off, the old blue pickup humming down the road like nothing ever happened. 3 weeks had passed since that morning at Marlowe's Gas, and the coffee cups had long been swept up, the police tape taken down, and the bruises on Elaine's arm had faded from purple to yellow, and then to nothing. But the memory hadn't faded. Not for her, not for Hank, and not for the town. Something had shifted. Elaine walked a little taller these days, not because she was trying to be brave, she had always been brave, but because now the world knew she was. The day after it happened, folks from 3 different church groups brought her pies and cards. Veterans from the local post came by just to sit for a while, their silence filled with understanding. Teenagers from the high school, kids who usually avoided eye contact with elders, had started calling her Mrs. R. and asked if she was okay, and at the gas station. Every officer on patrol had made sure to stop in and speak to Pete Jr., the new manager, not just because of protocol, but out of something deeper, something that had grown out of humility. Marlowe's even added a sign to the window. "We respect every neighbor. We verify every call." As for Hank, he never brought it up. He didn't need to. He kept doing what he always did, fixing things. The broken bench behind the community center, the old lift at the shelter, a loose gate behind the school. He didn't need cameras or recognition. That was never why he did anything. The envelope from Director Mathis, the one with the full reinstatement of Hank's high-level clearance, still sat unopened on the mantel. Right beside an old oil can and a faded picture of Elaine when she was 23, she didn't ask him why he hadn't touched it. She already knew. Some things you don't go back to, no matter how many apologies are stapled inside. One afternoon, as Hank was patching a cracked step at the local library, a cruiser pulled up beside the sidewalk. The door opened, and out stepped a young officer in a crisp uniform. He stood for a moment, unsure, then walked toward Hank. "Mr. Remmer." Hank looked up. "Yeah," the young man hesitated. "I was there that day. I was the one who grabbed your shoulder when you stepped toward your wife." Hank stood slowly, wiped his hands on his jeans. "I remember. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry, sir. I should have seen it. I should have paused." There it was again. That word, pause, the one that could have prevented it all. Hank looked him over, not angry, not disappointed, just quiet. "You still a trainee?" "Yes, sir." 6 more weeks. You learn faster than most," Hank said, then handed him the wrench. "Help me with this bracket." The officer blinked. "Really?" "Best way to learn something," Hank said, kneeling back down, "is by fixing something someone else broke." They worked in silence for 10 minutes. Not much talk, just tools and thought. Later that same week, Hank and Elaine were invited to speak at the local community forum, not as heroes, but as neighbors. The hall was filled with folks who'd lived in Oak Ridge their whole lives, and a few who had only just moved in, young and old, teachers, grocers, veterans, mothers, cops. Elaine spoke first. "I don't need apologies," she said plainly. "What I need is assurance that no other woman holding a bag of change is treated like a threat." There were nods across the room, some tearful, some ashamed, most just humbled. Then Hank stepped up to the podium, hands in his jacket pockets, eyes steady. "I was taught to act with force when needed," he said, "but also to wait when necessary. You don't always get second chances. Sometimes all you get is the chance to choose right the first time." He looked out over the audience. "I won't ever forget what happened that morning, but I'll also never forget what happened after. This town learned. That's worth something." At the end of the night, a reporter from a regional news station asked him the question everyone had been whispering since. "Mr. Rimmer, why didn't you press charges?" Hank paused, thought for a moment, then said, "Because punishment doesn't build better judgment. But accountability does." She nodded, scribbling the quote into her notepad. "And those 5 words you said that day, did you know they'd stop them?" He shook his head. "No, I didn't know if they'd stop anything, but I knew they had weight. The kind of weight that comes from decades of doing what's right, not loud, not flashy, just right." She closed her notebook. "And if the world needed you again?" Hank glanced toward Elaine, who was sipping tea beside a stack of old community cookbooks. She was smiling, chatting with the pastor's wife. "My clearance belongs to her now," he said softly. "My duty is right here." That clip aired on the 6 o'clock news across 4 counties. It wasn't dramatic. There were no replays or background music, just words, spoken plainly, spoken by a man who didn't need to yell to be heard. Weeks turned into months. One day, a newer recruit at the local precinct hung a handwritten sign above the locker room bench. It read, "Before you act, think. Before you shout, pause. If 5 words can stop a team, think what silence can do." Nobody took it down. In the end, it wasn't the badge or the clearance, or even the Admiral's visit that made the story. Last it was something far quieter. Elaine's steady recovery, Hank's quiet humility. The weight of earned respect, and somewhere deep inside a file cabinet at a federal agency, someone added a new line to the training protocols. Verify, then act, then proceed. And if you ever hear the name Hank Rimmer, stop talking and start listening. If you believe real strength speaks calmly, subscribe to Hidden Sparks. And if you know someone whose silence carried more weight than noise, comment respect.